The Ortolan was not a restaurant, it was a sanctuary. Nestled 72 floors above the ceaseless churn of New York City, it was a capsule of a bygone era. The air itself seemed different, heavy with the scent of beeswax, old leather, and the quiet confidence of generational wealth. The carpets were Persian, so dense they drank sound, leaving only the gentle symphony of silver-kissing porcelain and the murmur of conversations that could shift markets. Into this hushed cathedral of commerce and cuisine walked Eleanor Vance, 22 years old, clad in a black uniform so severely starched it felt like armor. Her only ornament was a small silver nameplate that read simply, Ellie. For 6 months, Ellie had been a ghost in this machine. By day, she was a scholarship student at Columbia, buried in macroeconomics and classical literature, a world away from this opulence. By night, she was a waitress at the Ortolan, a position she'd sought with a singular, desperate purpose. She moved with a preternatural grace, her steps silent, her service invisible, a skill honed by the necessity of being unnoticed. Her most notable trait, invisible to the patrons, was that she never carried a notepad. Not for a table of 2, not for a party of 12, with a flurry of allergies and modifications. The orders were simply etched into her mind, flawless and immediate, alongside the vintage of the wine, the name of the maitre d', and the subtle tells of a patron about to ask for the check. It was a gift or a curse, depending on the day. A memory so absolute, so photographic, that nothing ever truly faded. It was a skill she had been training, sharpening for this very stage. Tonight, her section included Table 1, the prime alcove with a panoramic view of the glittering cityscape. It was the unofficial throne of Julian Croft. Croft was not merely a billionaire, he was an event. As the CEO of Sterling Global, the conglomerate that had acquired the Ortolan's parent company a year prior, he treated the restaurant as his personal court. His face, a handsome mask of ruthless ambition, was a permanent fixture on the covers of financial magazines. He was a corporate raider who had perfected the art of the hostile takeover, and his personality was a direct reflection of his business strategy. Aggressive, invasive, and utterly devoid of sentiment. He was entertaining tonight. His guests were a pair of stern-faced German industrialists, and Croft was in full performance mode. His voice, a resonant baritone, sliced through the restaurant's quietude. He didn't speak to the staff. He broadcasted decrees in their general direction, expecting them to be fulfilled by unseen hands. Ellie, he barked, his eyes fixed on the Manhattan skyline. The use of her name was not a sign of familiarity, but of ownership. He knew the name of every tool in his toolbox. Yes, Mr. Croft. Ellie approached, a bottle of 1982 Petrus cradled in a white linen cloth. Her hands were steady, her expression a perfect portrait of serene neutrality. Is this breathing, or is it gasping for air? He drawled, gesturing to the decanter on the table. I specified it should be decanted precisely 90 minutes before our arrival. Not 89, not 91, 90. 90 minutes exactly, sir, Ellie confirmed, her voice soft but clear. I oversaw the decanting myself at 6:15, as per your reservation notes. Croft sneered, a subtle tightening of his lips. He was a man who thrived on finding fault, and her quiet competence was an irritant. We'll be the judge of that. Beside her, a younger waitress named Maria, barely 19, was topping up water glasses. Her hands trembled visibly. Maria was terrified of Croft, who was infamous for having servers summarily dismissed for perceived slights, like a glass remaining empty for more than a minute, or a fork being misaligned by a single degree. The dinner was a masterclass in passive and overt aggression. Croft sent back his consommé, claiming it was 2 degrees too cool. He loudly critiqued the restaurant's new art acquisitions, his own acquisitions, as a pathetic attempt at modernism. His guests, stoic and uncomfortable, merely nodded along, their polite smiles looking increasingly strained. Ellie moved through the minefield with the poise of a diplomat. She anticipated needs, cleared plates at the precise moment between the last bite and the subsequent conversation, and absorbed Croft's thinly veiled insults with a detachment that seemed to needle him more than any argument could. He wanted a reaction. He wanted fear, tears, something to validate his power. Ellie gave him nothing but flawless service. The breaking point arrived with the dessert course. Maria, the nervous young waitress, was clearing an adjacent table. Her movements were jerky, her fear radiating from her in palpable waves. As she lifted a heavy tray of porcelain and silver, her heel caught on the thick carpet. She stumbled, a small, desperate gasp escaping her lips as she careened sideways, directly into Ellie, who was carrying a silver tray bearing 4 delicate flutes of Chateau d'Yquem. The collision was a symphony of disaster. The tray tilted violently. 3 glasses shattered against the polished marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. The 4th, a vessel of liquid gold, catapulted from the tray in a perfect, horrifying arc, landing with a splash directly on the pristine white lapel of Julian Croft's custom Tom Ford tuxedo jacket. A collective intake of breath sucked the air from the ortolan. Every conversation stopped. The string quartet, playing softly in the corner, faltered into silence. Maria's face went corpse white. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice choked with panic. "Mr. Croft, I'm so sorry. It was me." Croft rose from his chair, not with a sudden jerk, but with a slow, deliberate menace that was far more terrifying. His face was a thunderous mask of purple rage. He didn't even glance at Maria, the actual cause of the accident. His eyes, burning with a cold fire, were locked on Ellie. "You!" he hissed, the word a projectile. "You clumsy, incompetent fool." "Sir, it was my fault," Maria stammered, tears now streaming down her face. "I bumped into her. Please." "Quiet!" Croft roared, and Maria physically flinched back as if struck. He focused his full, unrestrained fury on Ellie, jabbing a finger so close to her face she could feel the heat of his skin. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have the faintest comprehension of what you have just done? This jacket is worth more than your entire miserable existence. You're not just a waitress. You're a walking catastrophe. You serve food because you're too stupid and worthless to do anything else. You are nothing." The final word was a shout, echoing through the cavernous dining room. Diners at other tables stared, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. The manager, Mr. Albright, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed, was scurrying across the room, his expression one of sheer panic. Ellie stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their slight tremor. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze, her own expression unreadable. She waited. She let the silence stretch, letting his rage hang in the air, a toxic cloud. She waited until the only sound was his own ragged breathing. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a crystalline clarity that cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "If I am nothing, Mr. Croft," she said, her tone perfectly even, almost conversational, "then why did you tell Mr. Chen on your private call this afternoon that the geological surveys for the Mendoza acquisition were flawless, when you know they show a catastrophic fault line?" The silence that followed Ellie's question was of a different quality entirely. It was no longer shocked or anticipatory. It was absolute, a dense, heavy void that seemed to press down on the room. Julian Croft's rage-contorted face slackened, the purple hue draining away to be replaced by a baffled, waxy pallor. He blinked, the words computing not as an insult, but as a grenade that had just been rolled under his chair. "What? What did you just say to me?" he stammered. "I asked a question," Ellie replied, her voice unwavering. She took a half step forward, closing the distance he had created. "The Mendoza deal, the lithium mine acquisition in Argentina, the one you're discussing with your German guests right now. The geological surveys you received last Tuesday at 4:03 p.m. from GeoSource Analytics, file name Mendoza Rush Final Mash Geo Wanch Rev 7.pdf. The one that explicitly stated the primary mineral vein is situated directly over the San Cristobal fault line, making it commercially unviable and catastrophically dangerous to excavate. The one you told your broker to bury. Why did you lie about it, Mr. Croft?" A few diners who had assumed her first statement was some bizarre career suicide retort now looked on with dawning comprehension. This was not sarcasm. This was information. Croft's confusion morphed back into a different kind of fury, the fury of a cornered animal. This was impossible. The call had been on his private, encrypted line, in his office alone. "Albright," he bellowed, spotting the manager who had frozen mid-stride a few feet away. "Fire her. Get this corporate spy out of my restaurant. She's insane. I want her arrested." He jabbed his finger at a sobbing Maria. "And you're fired too. Both of you, get out." Mr. Albright, a man programmed to appease, looked from Croft's apoplectic face to Ellie's unnervingly calm one. "Miss Vance, please." "Mr. Croft, sir, a terrible misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding," Ellie said, her voice now taking on a cold, hard edge. She unclipped the silver name tag from her uniform and placed it gently on the table beside a half-eaten brioche. "My employment here is terminated, as is yours, Mr. Croft." Croft let out a short, barking laugh that held no humor. "You're delusional. You don't give the orders here. I do. I own this building. I own this company. I own you." "You own the company?" a new voice cut in, smooth as aged whiskey, but with an undercurrent of steel. "But you don't own the family." All heads turned. A man was rising from a small table at the bar, where he had been sitting alone, nursing a single glass of Macallan for the past 2 hours. He was in his early 30s, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that was understated, yet screamed money far more loudly than Croft's flashy tuxedo. He had a lean, aristocratic face, dark hair, and eyes that held a weary, cynical intelligence. He was the man Ellie had noticed watching the room all night, a silent observer she had pegged as old money, a man who didn't need to perform. Croft stared at him. "And who the hell are you?" The man walked slowly toward the table, his movements fluid and confident. He didn't look at Croft. His gaze was fixed on Ellie, a look of profound, reassessing curiosity. "He's right," the man said to her, a hint of a question in his voice. "The Mendoza survey, the San Cristobal fault. You're certain?" "I am," Ellie said, meeting his gaze without blinking. "I also heard him instruct his legal team to backdate the liability waivers for the local contractors to 2 weeks before the survey was received." The man gave a slow nod, a flicker of something, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of a shared secret, passing between them. He finally turned his attention to Julian Croft, who was looking between the two of them with growing alarm. "To answer your question, Julian," the man said, his tone now laced with an undisguised contempt, "my name is Leo Sterling." The name landed in the room like a physical weight. Sterling. Sterling Global. The name was carved into the granite facade of the tower they were all standing in. The name of the family who had founded the company, who had built it over a century before men like Julian Croft had learned how to turn legacy into leverage. But the Sterlings were gone, weren't they? The old patriarch had died, and his reclusive, estranged son had shown no interest in the family business, content to let the board install a visionary like Croft. "Sterling?" Croft stammered, his bravado crumbling. You have no power here. Your father's shares are in a blind trust. The board answers to the majority shareholder," Leo Sterling said calmly, "and as of a legal filing that became effective at 5 o'clock this evening, that blind trust was dissolved. Turns out I decided to take an interest in my inheritance after all. Which means, Julian, that the board answers to me." He stopped beside Ellie, positioning himself slightly in front of her, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of protection. "These are my guests," he said to the two bewildered German industrialists, his tone shifting to one of icy formality. "And I do not appreciate you conspiring with my CEO to defraud them and endanger the lives of Argentinian miners." He then looked at Croft, his eyes as cold and hard as diamonds. "You're not just fired, Julian. You're under investigation. I'd advise you to call your lawyer. A criminal lawyer." He gestured to two large men in dark suits who had materialized from the shadows near the entrance. They were not bouncers. They were something far more serious. "Gentlemen," Leo said, "please escort Mr. Croft from the premises. His access to all Sterling Global properties has been revoked." Julian Croft stood frozen, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief, fury, and sheer terror. The color had completely drained away, leaving a sickly, mottled gray. He looked at the waitress. This nothing, who had just dismantled his entire world with a few sentences. And he looked at Leo Sterling, the ghost who had just returned to reclaim his kingdom. He opened his mouth to say something, a protest, a threat, but no sound came out. He was a king dethroned, his power evaporating in the space of a single breath. As the security team took his arms, he didn't resist. He was a hollow man, his arrogance the only thing that had been holding him together. As they led him away, past the shocked faces of the city's elite, his journey from the pinnacle to the abyss was complete, leaving only the scent of spilled wine and shattered hubris in his wake. To understand how Ellie Vance came to be the catalyst for the downfall of a corporate titan, one had to understand her grandfather. He wasn't a CEO or a billionaire. He was Arthur Vance, a reference librarian from Queens who believed that knowledge was the only true form of power and that memory was its most sacred vessel. He had raised Ellie after her parents died in a car crash when she was 8. He didn't just teach her to read, he taught her to see, to listen, to absorb. He taught her mnemonic techniques, the method of low-key, memory palaces, building vast, intricate structures in her mind where she could store information. What started as a game, memorizing epic poems, historical dates, entire plays by Shakespeare, soon revealed itself as a rare and profound gift. She had an eidetic memory, but it was her grandfather's training that had turned it from a passive curiosity into an active, formidable tool. When Arthur fell ill with a rare degenerative disease, their modest savings were obliterated by medical bills. The insurance company, a subsidiary of a vast conglomerate, denied a crucial experimental treatment, citing a loophole in their policy. The company was Sterling Global. After her grandfather died, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a simmering, righteous anger, Ellie found a new purpose for her gift. She had spent a year researching Sterling Global and its new, ruthless CEO, Julian Croft. She learned of his reputation for asset stripping, for gutting companies and pensions, for prioritizing shareholder profit above all human decency. He was the embodiment of the faceless corporate cruelty that had condemned her grandfather. She knew she could never fight him in a boardroom. She had to get close to find a vulnerability. She had to become a ghost in his machine. She discovered he held court at the Ortolan 3 nights a week. With her polished demeanor and startling efficiency, she secured a job there. For 6 months she had listened. She served him his expensive wines and his meticulously prepared meals, and she cataloged every overheard snippet of conversation, every name, every deal. She built a new wing in her memory palace, dedicated solely to the business of Julian Croft. She learned of his arrogance, his disdain for the rules, and his growing recklessness. The Mendoza deal was the final, critical piece of the puzzle, a crime so blatant, so dangerous, that she knew it was the key. She hadn't planned for the confrontation to happen that night, but when Croft had screamed, "You are nothing," it wasn't just an insult to a waitress. It was an echo of the dismissive letters from the insurance company, the cold denial of a chance at life for the man she loved. It was an insult to her grandfather's memory, and in that moment, the ghost decided it was time to become a fury. Leo Sterling led Ellie not to a limousine, but through a discreet service exit and into the quiet, sterile corridors behind the restaurant. His 2 security men, Michael and David, followed at a respectful distance. He stopped in front of a heavy, unmarked steel door and opened it with a key card. The room beyond was not an office, but a small Spartan apartment. It was clean, but had the unused, impersonal air of a place rarely visited. A simple couch, a desk with a dormant laptop, and a single window overlooking the dark expanse of the East River. It was the pied-à-terre his father had kept, a refuge from the corporate world 1 floor below. "Are you all right?" Leo asked, his voice softer now that they were alone. Ellie nodded, though she was trembling, the adrenaline from the confrontation beginning to recede, leaving a cold hollowness in its wake. "I will be." He gestured to the couch. "Please, can I get you some water?" She sat, clasping her hands in her lap to still them. He returned with a glass of water, his movements efficient and quiet. He didn't sit, but leaned against the desk, studying her with an intensity that was unsettling. "You have an eidetic memory," he stated. It wasn't a question. And hyperthymesia, she added quietly. I can recall the vast majority of my autobiographical experiences, the good and the bad. He nodded slowly. My father, he used to talk about people like you. He was fascinated by the outliers of the human mind. He would have been fascinated by you. A shadow of old grief passed over his face. I owe you an apology. I was at the bar tonight because I'd just come from the meeting with my lawyers, where I finalized the dissolution of my trust. I came up here for a drink, to think. I saw Croft berating you about the wine, and my first thought was that you were just another part of the scenery. I was wrong. You couldn't have known, Ellie said. No, but I should have seen, he countered, his voice edged with self-reproach. I've been an absentee landlord for 5 years ever since my father died. I hated this world. I hated what it did to him. So I ran away and let vultures like Croft take over. I let them poison his legacy. Tonight you showed me what I should have been doing all along. You fought back. Why? This was the moment. The truth. Your company's insurance division denied my grandfather a life-saving treatment a year and a half ago. It was a discretionary denial, signed off by a committee Croft had installed to cut costs. He died 3 months later. Leo's face went pale. He sank into the chair opposite her, the cynical armor he wore cracking to reveal a genuine, deep-seated horror. My God, he whispered. My father started that division with a mandate that they never deny a claim based on cost alone. It was his proudest philanthropic achievement. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a new, profound respect. So this wasn't just a random act of whistleblowing. This was justice. It was a debt, Ellie corrected softly. For the next hour they talked. Ellie, prompted by Leo's sharp, incisive questions, began to reconstruct the web of deceit she had stored in her mind. She recited dates of phone calls, names of shell corporations Croft had mentioned, stock symbols, and bank routing numbers she'd glimpsed on papers he'd carelessly left on the table. It was a torrent of raw data, a prosecutor's dream. Leo listened, his initial awe transforming into strategic focus. He pulled out his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he cross-referenced names and entities. He's not just a fraud, Leo murmured, looking at the screen. He's running a shadow empire inside my own company. The Mendoza deal, it wasn't about the lithium. It was a land grab. He was using our capital to secure the site, intending to flip it to a competitor through a shell corporation he controls, leaving Sterling Global with a worthless, dangerous asset. And he'd pocket $1 billion on the back end. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. Your word, your memory is the key, Leo said, his gaze intense. But it's not enough. A good lawyer will paint you as a disgruntled employee with a vendetta. We need proof. We need the documents. We need the original Mendoza survey. His office, Ellie said immediately. 73rd floor. He keeps a private server, separate from the main Sterling network. I heard him tell his IT guy it was for sensitive personal projects. He accesses it with a 20-digit alphanumeric password he changes weekly. He never writes it down. Can you? Leo started, already knowing the answer. I saw him type it in 2 days ago. He has a slight tremor in his left hand, so he has to be very deliberate. I can see the keystrokes in my head, Ellie said, her eyes unfocusing for a second as she accessed the memory. It's 7K, 8J, P3, N9, R4, Q2, Z1, T5, B6, V2. Leo stared at her, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time. It transformed him, chasing away the cynicism and revealing the face of a much younger man. You're not a ghost, Ellie, he said. You're a weapon. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. They couldn't wait for warrants and subpoenas. Croft's people would be shredding documents and wiping servers the moment he was released from questioning. They had a window of a few hours at most. Leo made a call to Walter Davies, his father's old chief of security, a man he trusted implicitly. Davies had been forcibly retired by Croft, but remained fiercely loyal to the Sterling family. Within 20 minutes, Davies met them in the service corridor, his face grim, but his eyes alight with purpose. The 73rd floor is on lockdown, Mr. Sterling, Davies reported. Croft's personal security are there. They're loyal to his paycheck, not the company. We can't get in through the front. We're not going through the front, Leo said, a glint of his father's audacity in his eyes. The plan Davies devised was simple and elegant. He still had the schematics for the tower. He and his two most trusted men would create a diversion on the 70th floor, triggering a minor fire alarm that would force a partial evacuation of the executive wing. During the confusion, Leo and Ellie, disguised as maintenance crew, would access Croft's office via a rarely used service elevator. The next hour was a blur of calculated risks. Dressed in gray janitorial jumpsuits that smelled faintly of ammonia, they rode the rattling service elevator up the spine of the silent tower. Ellie's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the hum of the elevator cables. This was no longer about memory and observation. It was about action. They emerged into a darkened corridor. Distant shouts and the faint bleat of an alarm confirmed Davies' diversion was underway. Leo led the way, moving with a familiar confidence through the halls of his birthright. Croft's office was at the end of the hall, a vast corner suite with glass walls overlooking the city. A single light burned within. As they approached, a man in a suit stepped out, speaking into his sleeve. "No, the floor is secure. Just a false alarm. Keep wiping the local drives." He froze when he saw them. "Hey, maintenance isn't cleared for this level. Who are you?" Before Ellie could process what was happening, Leo moved. He didn't throw a punch. He simply stepped forward, grabbed the man's lapels, and slammed him back against the wall with a force that knocked the wind out of him. "I am," Leo snarled, his voice a low growl. "The man who say." The crawl was a journey through the cold, metallic entrails of the beast. The air in the duct was stale, thick with the acrid taste of old dust and settled secrets. Every scrape of Ellie's knees against the galvanized steel, every hitched breath, was an alien sound in this silent, forgotten space. Below her, muffled and distorted, she heard the sounds of the raid. Heavy footfalls, sharp, angry questions, the scrape of a chair being kicked aside. They were hunting for a ghost, unaware she was now floating above their heads, an unseen conscience in the machine's own respiratory system. In her hand, the hard drive was a small, dense talisman of immense weight. It was not just data, it was a compressed universe of sin. It was her grandfather's stolen months, the pensions of 1,000 factory workers, the lives of Argentinian miners treated as collateral damage on a balance sheet. Clutching it, she felt not the exhilaration of victory, but the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a war concluded. The adrenaline that had sharpened her senses to a razor's edge was now draining away, leaving behind a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. Her memory, a perfect, crystalline palace, was now a liability. It replayed the scene in Croft's office on a relentless loop, the hard, satisfying thud of the bronze statue against the grill. The look in Leo's eyes, not of fear, but of a grim, ancestral resolve, as if he were finally donning a crown he had spent his life fleeing. His last words to her, a hurried whisper as he'd slammed the grill shut, "Don't let them break what you've built, Ellie." He wasn't talking about the case, he was talking about her. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the images remained, etched onto the backs of her eyelids. Croft's face contorted with a rage so pure it was almost sublime. His final spat epithet, nothing. The word had been the key, the catalyst. For 6 months she had been a specter, a passive recorder of sins. But that word had given her substance. It had turned a ghost into an avenging angel. Now crawling through this suffocating darkness, she felt like neither. She was just a girl in a borrowed janitor's jumpsuit, covered in dust, with the fate of an empire in her pocket. The ductwork branched. Her grandfather had taught her to navigate by instinct and observation, but here there was only darkness and the faint hum of the building's lifeblood. She paused, pressing her ear to the metal. To the left, the hum was stronger, the airflow more pronounced, the central shaft. She shifted her body, the hard drive digging into her palm, and began to crawl again, not towards an escape, but towards the beginning of the reckoning. She emerged into the cavernous maintenance hub on the 50th floor like a creature born from the walls. She tumbled out of the access hatch Davies pried open, landing unsteadily on the concrete floor, coughing as the clean, cool air hit her lungs. Davies, his craggy face etched with concern, helped her up. Across the room, leaning against a massive HVAC unit, was Leo. He wasn't smiling. His face was pale, his knuckles were bruised, and there was a small, raw cut on his cheekbone. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his eyes scanning her, checking for injuries. He stopped just short of touching her, his hands hovering in the space between them. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and ragged. "Are you?" she countered, gesturing to his face. "An amicable disagreement with one of Croft's security team," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "He felt I was overstepping my authority. I persuaded him otherwise. Davies has him. Resting." She held out the hard drive. "I have it. Everything." He took it from her, his fingers brushing hers. The brief contact sent a jolt through her, a current of shared peril and purpose. He didn't look at the drive. His eyes remained locked on hers. "Ellie," he said, and the way he spoke her name held the weight of the last 2 hours. "What you did tonight, what you risked." He trailed off, shaking his head slightly, as if words were inadequate. "I finished what I started," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "For my grandfather." "You did more than that," he replied, his gaze intense. "You reminded me what this company was supposed to be, what my father wanted it to be. You gave his legacy a voice again." They stood there for a long moment in the humming silence of the building's core, surrounded by the machinery that kept the tower breathing. The world 70 floors above, the fine wine, the hushed conversations, the bloodless commerce, felt a million miles away. Here, in the guts of the skyscraper, the truth felt tangible. It was in the grime on her hands, the cut on his face, the small black rectangle of data that could shift the foundations of power. The emergency board meeting was called for 9 the following morning. They spent the intervening hours in the Spartan pied-à-terre, a war room suspended over the glittering, indifferent city. While a trusted team of Leo's forensic accountants, summoned from a deep sleep, began a frantic, encrypted analysis of the drive's contents, Leo and Ellie sat in a heavy, charged silence. Sleep was an impossible luxury. Leo had shed his torn suit jacket and was pacing the length of the small apartment, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. He was no longer the cynical runaway. He was a general on the eve of battle, the full weight of his inheritance settling upon him like a shroud. Ellie sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket he'd found for her. The tremors had subsided, replaced by a strange, preternatural calm. She was watching the city lights blur into constellations. For the first time, she allowed her mind to drift back, past the 6 months of tense servitude, past the year of meticulous research, to the source of it all. She saw her grandfather, his hands gnarled with arthritis but still turning the pages of a book with a lover's care. She could smell the scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea that clung to his favorite cardigan. She remembered him teaching her the method of loci, turning their small queen's apartment into a vast, imaginary landscape where she could store the history of the world. "Memory isn't about the past, Eleanor," he'd told her, his voice a warm, gentle rasp. "It's the blueprint for the future. It's how we learn. It's how we know who to trust. It's how we remember to be kind." "He kept a picture," she said suddenly, her voice making Leo stop his pacing. He turned to her. "Who?" "Croft. On a table in his office. A trophy. It was of him with Robert McKinley." Leo's brow furrowed. "The head of the Apex Steel Pension Fund?" Ellie nodded. "The one Croft dissolved. McKinley. He killed himself 2 weeks later. Croft kept the picture. He smiled in it. The memory was perfect, clinical, and utterly sickening. She felt a wave of nausea. Leo came and sat in the chair opposite her. He placed his whiskey glass on the floor, untouched. "The drive confirmed it," he said, his voice grim. "The trophies file. There are dozens of them. Photos, newspaper clippings of his victims' misfortunes, confidential letters of termination. He wasn't just a criminal, Ellie. He's a sadist. He savors the destruction he causes." A tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It was for McKinley, for the hundreds of other names in the files she'd never known. For her grandfather, who had died believing he was just a victim of an uncaring system, never knowing the system wasn't just uncaring, it was actively malevolent, and it had a smiling face. When I stand in front of that board tomorrow, she whispered, looking at Leo, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Who am I? Leo leaned forward, his expression softening with a profound empathy that startled her. You are Eleanor Vance, he said, his voice imbued with a certainty that seemed to anchor her in the swirling chaos of the last 24 hours. You are the granddaughter of Arthur Vance. You are the memory this company chose to forget, and tomorrow you will make them remember. The boardroom on the 74th floor was designed to intimidate. A single 50-foot slab of polished black obsidian served as a table, reflecting the strained, pale faces of the board members like a dark, still lake. They were sharks, men and women who had profited from Croft's ruthlessness, and they radiated a collective, palpable annoyance at this disruption. When Leo entered with Ellie at his side, a murmur of contempt rippled through the room. The chairman, a corpulent man named Breyer, sneered. Mr. Sterling, this is a private meeting. We have no time for your theatrics. Ms. Vance is not theatrics, Leo said, his voice cold and clear as he took his father's seat at the head of the table. She is the agenda. The doors flew open and Julian Croft stormed in, flanked by a phalanx of lawyers. He looked immaculate, his suit perfectly pressed, his face a mask of supreme indignant confidence. But Ellie, with her eye for detail, saw the faint tremor in his hand, the tiny bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. He was afraid. This meeting is illegal, Croft boomed, his voice unnaturally loud in the acoustically perfect room. I am the CEO, and I demand you remove this woman from the premises before I have her charged with trespassing and corporate espionage. Your tenure as CEO, Julian, concluded approximately 12 hours ago in your office, when your security assaulted me, Leo said calmly. The only reason you are not in a federal holding cell right now is because I wanted these people, he gestured to the board, to hear the truth from the source. He nodded to Ellie. This was not the ortolan. The audience was not composed of diners, but of co-conspirators and enablers. Her heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She rose, her hands clasped behind her back. She did not look at the documents projected on the screen behind her. The Mendoza survey, the offshore bank statements. She didn't need them. She looked directly at Julian Croft. On October 17th, 2 years ago, she began, her voice perfectly even, you were dining at the Ristorante Krakow in Milan. You were with Heinrich Miller of Kesselbank. You ordered the saffron risotto and a bottle of 2004 Macedo. You told Mr. Miller, and I quote, the beauty of the Cayman shell is that the losses become ghosts. They haunt a balance sheet that no one can ever see. A flicker of confusion crossed Croft's face. Muller was dead. The meeting had been secret. On May 3rd of last year, she continued, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board, you had a conference call from your car. You were on the FDR Drive, stuck in traffic by the 34th Street exit. You instructed your legal team to add a rider to the Apex Steel pension dissolution, stripping post-retirement health benefits. You said, let them buy their own damn aspirin. Their lifetime is over. Ours is just beginning. Your driver that day was a man named Hector Rosales, she went on, her voice never wavering. She constructed a memory palace for them all, each room a different crime, furnished with precise, irrefutable detail. She didn't just recite facts, she painted scenes. The brand of cigar he was smoking, the name of the waitress who served him, the score of the baseball game playing on the television in the background. It was a terrifying, omniscient display. She was not just a witness, she was a recording angel, reciting his own life back to him, stripping away the lies until only the ugly, naked truth remained. The board members were no longer looking at Croft with loyalty, but with a dawning self-preservationist horror. They were not horrified by his crimes, but by the terrifying reality that this unassuming woman might have a room for each of them in her palace of memory. Lies! All of it! Croft finally roared, his composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. He lunged across the table, his face a mask of purple fury, his hands reaching for her. You little nothing! I'll destroy you! Leo's security team intercepted him before he'd taken 2 steps, pinning his arms behind his back. He struggled like a caged animal, his expensive suit twisting, his eyes wild with the terror of a king who has just seen a ghost on his throne. He stared at Ellie, his chest heaving. "You," he whispered, the sound of venomous hiss that carried across the silent room. "You're nothing." Ellie met his gaze. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that remained was a vast, quiet sorrow. "You said that before," she replied, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet it filled the cavernous room. "It's the word you use for people you can't monetize, the people who get in your way. But my grandfather taught me that we are the sum of our memories. Your memories are a ledger of cruelty, a collection of trophies won from other people's pain. My memory is of a kind man who taught me to read poetry. It's of the smell of old books and the sound of his laughter. It's the memory of his hand in mine when he died, and of a promise I made to him." She took a slow breath, her eyes holding his, refusing to let him look away. "So you tell me, Mr. Croft, in the end, when all the money is gone and all the deals are dust, which of us is truly nothing?" The silence that followed was absolute. Julian Croft had no answer. He had built his world on the idea that people like Ellie, like her grandfather, were zeros on a spreadsheet. He had just been undone by the one value he could never comprehend. As they dragged him, broken and sputtering, from the room, he was already becoming a ghost. Months later, the story had faded from the headlines, just as Ellie had faded from public view. She'd refused every interview, every book deal, every offer of fame. Victory for her was not a ticker tape parade. It was a return to silence. Leo, now the permanent CEO of Sterling Global, was waging a different kind of war. It was a slow, grueling battle against a corporate culture that had metastasized under Croft. He was rebuilding his father's company, not in his father's image, but in the image of the promise Ellie had unearthed. He found her in the reading room of the New York Public Library, the one at Bryant Park, surrounded by the ghosts of 10 million stories. She was poring over municipal legal texts, and she looked more at peace than he had ever seen her. "I came to offer you a job," he said, sliding into the chair opposite her. The familiar line felt different now, stripped of its desperation, filled with a quiet respect. "I've created the Arthur Vance Foundation. It's funded with $100 million from Croft's seized assets. Its sole purpose is to provide independent oversight of the insurance division and to advocate for policyholders. To be the memory for people the system is designed to make us forget. It needs a director." Ellie looked up from her book, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. "I'm not an executive, Leo." "I'm not asking for an executive," he said. "I'm asking for a librarian's granddaughter. I need someone who understands that a person's life is worth more than the fine print. I need someone who will never, ever forget that." He slid a simple one-page document across the table. It wasn't a contract. It was a mission statement. At the bottom, in clear, bold letters, were the words her grandfather had inspired. "No claim denied on the basis of cost alone." She read it, her fingers tracing the words. Then she looked up at him, her eyes clear and resolute. "I accept." A year to the day of the boardroom coup, they sat at table 1 in the Ortolan. The restaurant was transformed. The oppressive hush was gone, replaced by the warm, vibrant buzz of conversation. The staff moved with an easy confidence. Maria, the young waitress who had trembled in fear, was now the floor manager, her instructions delivered with a smile. Leo looked different too. There were new lines of exhaustion around his eyes, but the old cynicism was gone, replaced by the weary gravity of command. He had aged a decade in a year, but it was an age that suited him. The chef, a man who had served Leo's father, approached their table. He placed a small, leather-bound menu before Ellie. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for you, from all of us." She opened it. The menu was a chronicle of their story, each dish a memory. The Mendoza consommé with a fault line of saffron, sterling scallops with a whistleblower's just, and for dessert, the librarian's promise, a simple, perfect apple tart, just like the one her grandfather used to bake. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a quiet, profound gratitude. She had fought for the memory of one man, and in doing so, had given a future to so many others. Leo raised his glass of water. "To new beginnings," he said. Ellie clinked her glass against his. To good memories, she replied. They looked out the vast window at the city sprawling below, an infinite tapestry of lights, each one a story, each one a life. They were not titans or saviors. They were custodians, one of a legacy, the other of a promise. They had stared into the abyss of corporate nihilism and had chosen to build something new on the rubble of the old. And high above the city, in the quiet hum of a restaurant reborn, they both understood that this was not an ending. It was the first day of a long and difficult peace.